In 1986, the same was again true, when Brown again emerged from the courts victorious, after being implicated and charged in the murder of a minibus driver, who was said to have been involved in a minor accident with him along Maxfield Avenue in Kingston. It is said that the driver, unaware of who Brown was, made the fatal mistake of getting into an argument, and upon realizing who he was dealing with, made a bid to save his life by fleeing to a nearby police station in the hope of seeking refuge. But according to unofficial reports, not even that was enough to save the driver. As it is said, he was chased and murdered in cold blood, on the steps of the very police station, where he had sought refuge. With his legal troubles in Jamaica behind him and his political connections on solid ground, Coke now had time to continue his illegal quest of wealth creation. In 1986, federal authorities in the United States reported that the Shower Posse had spread their wings to over a dozen U.S. cities and were raking in a substantial portion of the estimated 25% of the billion-dollar illegal drug trade, estimated to be earned by Jamaican gangs.
These people are absolutely the most vicious organized crime group in the United States today.
We're getting some innocent people getting killed as a result of the existence of these organizations.
Federal, state, and local agencies in 21 cities around the nation are serving 435 warrants. The violations include murder, drug trafficking, and illegal weapons. 91 warrants in South Florida include 70 in Broward and fewer than 10 in Dade, while the Immigration Service is searching for 20 illegals imported from the slums of Jamaica, where the violent posses originated.
But as the Shower Posse grew in stature, so did the federal investigation into their activities. In November of 1988, 53 Shower Posse members were arrested in New Jersey on drug distribution charges. A month before, a federal grand jury indicted 34 members of the Shower Posse, including Jim Brown and Vivian Blake's two half-brothers, Errol Hussing and Tony Bruce. Coke, however, managed to remain a free man until the beginning of the 1990s, when international police investigations, which had become like a noose around the posse's neck, began to tighten. According to reports, this was right around the same time that Richard Storyteller Morrison, an alleged leading Shower Posse member, was captured in Jamaica by U.S. authorities and illegally flown out of the island to the United States to stand trial. Update: the Morrison incident has since spawned a Supreme Court case in Jamaica, brought against the judiciary by Morrison himself, 60 at the time of this investigation, after it has since been determined that he was wrongfully extradited to the United States in 1991. Morrison did 22.5 years in a U.S. jail on a 24.5-year sentence. He was deported to Jamaica in January of 2013. In February 1991, Coke was arrested by the police in Jamaica and locked up at the General Penitentiary, now the Tower Street Adult Correctional Facility, after the U.S. government requested that he be extradited to answer murder and drug trafficking charges. The extradition was fought tooth and nail by the best attorneys that money could buy at the time, but after a year of legal wrangling, where the effort to acquire a special leave to appeal was rejected by the United Kingdom Privy Council, the writing was on the wall. But when it rains it pours. Exhibit B. The Florida-based website, www.emergency.com, posted this report in August 1992. Miami, Florida. A drug gang war that started in Kingston, Jamaica, early in 1992 may have recently spilled over into the streets and bars of Miami. Reportedly, an early Saturday morning nightclub shooting of 22 people involved members of Jamaican Shower Posse gang. Crimes Office of the Broward County Sheriff's Office say that the nightclub killings may have been retribution for the February killing of Mark Coke, a leader of the Jamaican Shower Posse drug gang. The Shower Posse supposedly got its name from the shower of lead they shoot at rival gangs. An agent of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, ATF, said that Saturday's shootings had all the earmarks of a Jamaica Posse hit. Special Agent Joe Vince was quoted by the United Press International as saying, "The Posse is the most vicious organized crime group in the United States today." Captain Al Lamberty of the Broward County Sheriff's Office said that the shooting was a perfect textbook example of how the posse does business. The young Coke's murder was rumored to have stemmed from a dispute between Shower Posse members and members of the Black Roses crew, which was then led by Willie Haggart Moore, who would eventually be killed in a drive-by that has since spawned many a rumor. It is said that popular dancer, Gerald Bogle Levy, Haggart's right-hand man, was reportedly doused with alcohol during the dispute, which occurred at a weekly dance called Beachline, held at the Helsh Beach in St. Catherine. No one knows for sure what the dispute was really about, but it is said to have been diffused by police officers who were on the scene before it could escalate. 3 weeks later, the very day his son was being buried after being shot while riding on Maxfield Avenue, in close proximity to the Black Roses base, Jim Brown, who was now in the custody of the Jamaican authorities, was burnt to death in a mysterious and questionable fire inside his cell. Unconfirmed reports suggest that the notorious gangster committed suicide upon realizing that he would actually be handed over to the US authorities, but this claim has been refuted by others who say his death was a result of a botched escape attempt. Still others say Coke was murdered to keep him from spilling the beans to the US authorities. Some however have gone as far as suggesting that Jim Brown did not die in the mysterious fire, but is actually still alive, all part of a grand conspiratorial cover-up. When faced with these arguments in 1992 outside a Kingston courthouse, Jim Brown's lawyer Tom Tavares Finson, a JLP member of parliament at the time, smiled sarcastically from behind his designer sunglasses, before replying, "If you believe Jim Brown just burned to death, by accident, in his jail cell, you'll believe in the tooth fairy. The only thing I can tell you for sure is I saw the body, and Jim Brown is dead." The killing of Coke's son sparked a new round of political bloodletting, and in the weeks that followed, shootings occurred in Hannahtown, Arnett Gardens, Denham Town, Rose Lane, and Matthews Lane, prompting then Prime Minister Michael Manley to call for a meeting with the Minister of Opposition and Member of Parliament for West Kingston, Edward Seaga. The violence also sparked a march by a group of churches through the affected communities. But the violence merely paused, and according to many, was eventually exported beyond local shores. But wait, there is more. To fully understand Jim Brown the man, understanding the timeline and what he did, within that time frame, is paramount. Let's remember that in 1966 he was a mere teenager, athlete and an apprentice, but by the mid-70s, by the time DUDUS was about 5 or 6 years old, his power had escalated greatly, beyond the imagination and comprehension of most. Not only was he a known and feared enforcer, but he and Vivian had big plans. Always a street-smart, quick-witted thinker, Jim Brown learned early the importance of supply and demand, and with his childhood friend, Vivian now in New York hustling, it didn't take long for Jim to create a pipeline that funneled marijuana straight from Kingston to New York City. This was the 70s, and with airport security literally being nothing to talk about, the transportation of the illegal substance was a literal walk in the park, and Jim Brown was strolling, raking in millions from his newfound deal. With Vivian in New York and Jim in Jamaica, the situation could not have been better. A match made in heaven. Vivian needed product, marijuana, and Jim needed money. One was the brain of the operation, and the other was the muscle. Everything was working, and Jim became so powerful that he was single-handedly able to maintain order on the streets of the United States and elsewhere, all the way from his fortress in Jamaica. Even before Jim Brown was the Don, he was the man. With an over 6-foot presence that shouted intimidating from the moment of sight, and with the backing of his cronies, Jim Brown was in full flight. He may not have been the top man, Claudia was still alive, but it didn't make much of a difference. He lived the part to the fullest, and with him being the one responsible for the New York connection that was bringing in major revenue, his respect was galvanized even further. So by the time the reins of Tivoli Gardens were in Jim's hands, he was already an extremely well-groomed man for the position. with Jim Brown stepping into a shadow position of power, right before the JLP's victory at the polls in the 1980 general election, and he now in charge of the party's political stronghold. Buyer Mitchell was alive and was actually the real West Kingston Don, but that was only in name. Things changed rapidly. According to retired U.S. drug enforcement, and alcohol, tobacco and firearms agents, who were active at the time, Jim Brown and his cronies' power was merely legitimized by the JLP's landslide victory in 1980, because they had already infiltrated the United States. By the mid to late 70s, it is said that he, Jim Brown, was buying guns in the US like they were going out of style in 1979 and 1980. According to these agents, he was entering the US on a visa, and he had plenty of money to spend on guns and ammunition. One agent even went on record to say, "You think it was Jim Brown's money he was spending to bring back guns to Jamaica that were used to kill the opposition? Give me a break. Where did the money come from? Use your imagination on that one." Veteran Jamaican journalist Lloyd Williams confirmed the claim of the U.S. agent in an August 1999 GQ article entitled, "The Caribbean Connection," when he said, "The Shower Posse's firepower improved dramatically during the run-up to the elections in 1980. M16 rifles, previously unheard of, were flowing into Jamaica by the barrelful. Even the most powerful Kingston gangs, drawn from the shanties, could hardly afford American cigarettes," he said, continuing with, "much less automatic weapons, at least in the beginning. These guys, if they'd seen a pack of camels, they would have fainted," he continued. So there had to be people supplying them with the weapons, and teaching them how to use them. Those were the realities of the day, and Jim Brown was a key figure in all that was happening, both locally, in Jamaica, and internationally, specifically in the United States of America. One of the most gruesome accounts of Jim Brown's wanton callousness came to life in a federal courtroom when Cecil Connor, aka Modeler, or Charles Little Nut Miller, Shower Posse member who turned government informer, after being arrested in Rochester, New York, in February 1985, on marijuana and cocaine charges, decided to do a tell-all. The case was the notorious nickel homicide. Modeler testified that Jim Brown was enraged after being robbed of his jewelry at a Miami crack house in 1984, and with that occurring he was called in to go back there with Jim and others. Modeler testified that he witnessed a pregnant woman pray before she and 4 others were gunned down by Jim Brown and other Shower Posse members, while he, Modeler, stood guard. This was one of the bloodiest unsolved murders in Miami's history. Until then, Connor conceded that he was asked to go there to cover Jim Brown's back, and he did just that. The name of the murdered in the above incident were Gladstone Brightly, Elaine Wooden, Jeanette Brazil, Dora Woods and Larry Patterson. Another woman, Tammy Cox, was also wounded in the said incident. The stories are many, but this was the Jim Brown law enforcement in America knew. In the garrison of Kingston, where he was a key enforcer for former Prime Minister Edward Seaga's Jamaica Labour Party, the story was different. But then again, that depends on who is being asked, because, to local police who had tried and failed to pin 14 separate murder charges on him, to them, Brown was a criminal, and one the most influential of the city's so-called dons. Mr. Seaga, however, called Brown the protector of Kingston's poor.
And in terms of how the community respects and treats him as a protector of their community. Thank you.
And was very vocal at his demise, and extremely visible in his capacity of leading the 35,000-plus funeral procession of the Don of all Dons. But there are two sides to every coin. And as time passed, and even with all that was happening, Jim Brown still found time to take onto himself a family, a contradictory move when compared to his affiliation and reputation, both as a womanizer and a gangster. He sent his children to some of the Kingston's most prominent high schools. His eldest son, Mark Anthony Koch, aka JRT, went to Wolmer's Boys School, while Andrew Layton Koch, otherwise called Liberty or Live Up, attended Excelsior High, and Michael Christopher DUDUS Koch, attended Arden High from 1981 to 1986. Moves like these were the defining factors that separate Brown from his counterparts, because although he was who he was, like one female who knew him well said, "The dad's a the real man, dem man take care of house." Translation: the boss is a real man, he takes care of the home, meaning family. There can be no denying that Jim Brown did just that and more. He had the resources. With him being who he was, he could have easily had the best teachers at the Tivoli Gardens Comprehensive High School, adjacent to the Tivoli Gardens Fortress, at the beck and call of his children, but instead he took them out of their comfort zone, which not only exposed them, but prepared them. Besides ensuring that his kids attended some of Kingston's most prominent high schools, it didn't take long for Jim Brown to acquire residence fitting for an upper echelon family, miles away from the hustle and bustle of Tivoli Gardens and West Kingston at large. Unknown to most, from as early as the mid-80s, Jim Brown's family residence was not Tivoli Gardens, but was actually in the residential suburbs of Arcadia, located in Upper St. Andrew, home then also to another intimidating figure of that era, PNP strongman and an alleged enforcer, Clinton Jingles Davey. Arcadia was a far cry from Tivoli Gardens in every way imaginable, from the look, the smell, the energy, the aesthetics, not to mention the price range, but money was not an issue, and that made reality flexible. His wife drove a Benz and he drove a BMW. This was how Jim lived. He took care of home but he also took care of the streets, and could oftentimes be seen with two females, none being his wife, on his arms, and at all times draped in the finest that money could buy. DUDUS, however, was not whisked away to the suburbs like the rest of the children. His mother was Pauline Patsy Hawley Burton, not Jim Brown's wife, and she lived in Tivoli Gardens. Jim's wife was Bev Brown, the mother of most of his children, including Jarty and Liberty, but even with that, he, DUDUS, lacked nothing. By the time DUDUS was 16 in 1985, his father was at the top of his game and rising. DUDUS was the son of the Don and lived like one. Name it, and if he wanted it, he got it, because with most of Jim's children no longer permanent residents of the Tivoli community, there was no way he could make it seem as though the child that was visible to the community was being slighted in any way, shape or form. Both DUDUS and his mother were well taken care of by both Jim and the rest of the community. This was Jim Brown's son, so the respect that was his from an early age was second nature. To understand DUDUS the boy, one must simply focus on Jim Brown the man, because this was what fueled DUDUS the boy into DUDUS the man, what he saw on day-to-day basis. Keep in mind, he was the son of a Don, like father like son, a man who was the man before the title was even bestowed on him. And also keep in mind that he, DUDUS, lived in Tivoli Gardens, even when Jim's other children didn't. He was on the front line of all the activity. He lived it, heard it and saw it daily, and no doubt was soon aware of the power that was his. He was Getter royalty, alive and in living royal color. It shouldn't take much of an imagination to see the type of environment that was the incubator for DUDUS. His godfathers, uncles and protectors were the likes of Claudius Massop, Vivian Blake, Carl Byar Mitchell, Curly Locks and a man said to be one of Jim Brown's most notorious henchmen, Bitter Blood, or Blood. A name bestowed on him due to his complexion and his obsession with the life-giving fluid. These were the hands that held DUDUS, the voices that instructed him, the voices whose stories he heard or heard of, the same persons whose actions he would eventually come to emulate. This was his breeding ground, his training ground. Tivoli Gardens, Kingston, Jamaica, under the protection and guidance of some of the most notorious perpetrators of murder and mayhem Jamaica has ever seen.